well, let's get to the band at hand here. As we said off the top, we're reviewing Static X's Wisconsin Death Trip. I will tell you a little bit about the album, and then we'll talk about our history with it. This album came out on March 23rd, 1999. It didn't do that great on the Billboard charts. It peaked at number 107 on the Billboard 200, but it did make it to number 1 on the Heat Seekers chart. And in 2001, 2 years later, was certified platinum by the Record Industry of America. So it obviously ended up doing well, but wasn't a chart-topping album, but sold a lot of copies. Yeah, that's pretty much all we need to know about the album as far as its history. There are a couple funny things about it. The one is funny. This sentence from the Wikipedia: the album was produced by Ulrich Wilde in a matter of 8 weeks with a budget of $50,000. The band originally wanted Terry Date to produce it, but they couldn't afford him, so they opted for his assistant. So that's always a good way to do it. Like, oh, you like hang out with Terry Date, right? So we can probably afford you. So that's Wisconsin Death Trip. Bryan, what was your kind of history with Static X at the time that this came out?
Static X is a weird one, man, because like I got a lot of my news from Alternative Press. Did you read that magazine?
No.
It was like a purely new metal thing.
Right. Yeah. Alt Press was like, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was really hard to get in Canada, maybe. I remember reading Revolver a lot. That was like a big one. And then Maxim had their own music magazine, Blender, which I liked.
I read both of those too.
Yeah. And they covered a lot of new metal back then. Like they were a very Korn and Limp Bizkit positive magazine. So those were kind of the main ones I read. Like, yeah, I want to say that probably a big part of the reason I didn't read Alt Press was that it was hard to get in Canada, if I remember correctly.
Well, that was the one I got if I could get it. It was that and Spin were the two magazines I like to read a lot.
Yeah.
And but Alternative Press, and the PRP, which was a website.
Yeah, the PRP I read all the time.
Yeah, every day I got up as like the fucking New York Times.
Yeah, I used to check the PRP.com and cornweb.com. There was like a whole series of like web sites. Like there was like Biscuit Web, Corn Web, System Web, like for all Deftones Web. And most of them weren't really that great, but the Corn Web one was like very, very active. Like it was like the news section. Like it was unbelievable how many news items this site was able to come up with for Korn. And the mailbag was like, I remember applying multiple times to be someone who answered Korn questions in the Korn mailbag. Like it was literally just people would ask questions about the band, and then they just had like a group of 5 people that would just answer them before Google was really a thing. So yeah, so those are my the PRP and Korn Web. Sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
Shit, I was on the PRP the other day because Korn put a teaser for The Devil Went Down to Georgia.
Right, sure.
And yeah. I could not. Well, it's not. I'm not going to say I couldn't figure out the teaser, but I didn't want to devote the mental energy to figuring out the teaser.
That's totally fair. You're like, well, this is going to come out soon, and it's going to be fine.
I don't need to sit here and like work it out and like keep moving the letters around until they start to look like words.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, honestly, as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to forget about it. And then in a week it's going to come out. And then I'm going to be like, oh, that's what the teaser was for. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So like I checked it. So what was I saying?
You're talking about Static X and Alt Press.
Oh yeah, they covered them all the time. Like they were just like they were that band that were like they mentioned them in the same breath as a lot of the second wave good bands that came through. And I saw them live like 3 or 4 times, like just opening for people and by virtue of just like being around. But it's a different kind of music. It draws from a different place than what I looked for at the time in music, and even now a little bit.
Yeah, I would say my experience with Static X is really similar. Like I think there was always this kind of like sect of new metal that had a little bit more roots in industrial. So there was like bands like this, like Static X, like Power Man 5000, like Fear Factory, Cold Chamber to an extent, that had these kind of more like, it seemed like they were influenced by metal, but also like craft work. And they completely missed me. Like I never liked any of those bands. Like, to honestly, in 2002, if you played a song, like, you could have done a great guessing game with me and played me 10 songs, 5 of which were Static X and 5 of which were Power Man 5000. And I wouldn't have been able to tell you who was who. Like, to me, they were like the same band. I would mix them up all the time. And I'm sure there are people who are going to be mad at me and say they liked one or the other, or how could I confuse them or whatever. But for whatever reason, like, yeah, I was so into new metal, but just this kind of branch of new metal that was, yeah, like I say, kind of industrial, that I obviously, when we prepare for these episodes, I read a lot of articles and stuff, and Static X described their sound as evil disco, which I don't think is really a great way of describing it, because it has like really no disco elements whatsoever. But
right,
but
and disco rules too.
And like, disco's so good. Like, this doesn't have any of the danciness of disco. Like, it doesn't, you know, like, I think they just called it that because they used like the way that it was described was, Wayne Static said in this one interview I read, that they start with the like drums and the samples and they build the songs on top of them. So like, as opposed to starting with a guitar riff and then adding the low end underneath, they started the other way around. And I think that that's why, you know, they went with disco. Like, they're like, yeah, you know, we use synths and we use programmed beats, so we're basically disco. It's like, well, I mean, you're not really disco.
Well, also, like, you don't want to, I guess, like, you don't want to say that you're just new metal at that time.
For sure.
Like, you were never allowed to do that. None of those bands would ever do that. And like, also, never were you just to say you're metal.
Yeah, because they weren't that either, really.
And new metal guys, I think, and this is how I felt, and this might be wrong or whatever, but like, a lot of new metal guys like danceable, poppy, like more organic stuff. Like, it comes from the side of like Rage Against the Machine or Red Hot Chili Peppers, which I don't like. I'm just saying, like, music that came more from that sector than from the Nine Inch Nails.
Well, and it also seems like a lot of, like, a band that seems like it was a huge touchstone for a ton of new metal bands was Depeche Mode. Like Jonathan Davis always talked about them. Deftones always talked about them. Like, I feel like that's where, like, the new metal, like, to me, that's why it's funny. Like, don't get me wrong, I think evil disco is a great way of marketing your music. Like, I think that's an extremely very, very good phrase to use. Like, yeah, we're evil disco. Like, if you're 13 years old, you go, yeah, I'm listening to this evil disco record. Like, it sounds fucking cool. They should have called their record that. Like, this record should be called Evil Disco. It shouldn't be called...
I like Wisconsin Death Trip. I think is a really cool name.
It's also a cool name too. Album. I'm just saying, you know, Evil Disco would have been a sick name as well, in my opinion. Like, I just think that, yeah, it didn't have, like, the other bands were actually much more dancey in my mind than this band is, because they were listening to a lot more funkier stuff that was like a lot more groove driven, whereas like the grooves on this record are maybe a little bit more absent. But yeah, I would say, like, you know, before we get into the record proper, like, yeah, that's kind of just my stamp on this whole thing. Like, Static X admittedly was like a band that I just completely missed. I never owned any of their records. I didn't know anyone who liked them either. Like, it wasn't like I had people who were like, you don't like Static X, or you got to listen to Like, they were never a band that people that I hung out with talked about as like a must listen or anything.
Oh, see, that's the thing. They were big, like, here.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they went platinum. Like, obviously they were a big band, but yeah.
I mean, here in Columbus though, among my friends, it was like, I mean, most of them liked Static X. And that's the other thing. What you were saying about the disco thing is that is like marketing, because like I'm 100% of the time going to give something that calls itself evil disco a chance.
Oh,
even
totally.
Like back then, You know, I was very aware that I was listening to music that was inspired by other music. I didn't think that this was like a new thing, and I knew that I liked like disco and rap and like and metal, these things that influence this kind of music. And I would have definitely, I mean, that's what piqued my interest about this. I also do, I mean, I don't want to, I like the vibe of this band a lot. I think like the vibe and everything is like, it's fucking really cool. You know, it might look a little weird in 2020. I mean, especially the way they're doing it. Like he looks kind of like the Slim Jim man a little bit to people.
Yeah, the hair is definitely a thing.
Yeah, I understand, but I like understand that part of it. But
yeah,
like,
that's a good gimmick too, for sure.
Yeah,
you call yourself Wayne Static and it looks like you just stuck your finger in an electrical socket. Like that makes perfect sense to me as well. Like,
yeah, it seems like this was like something that's like, if this was a fucking painting or a movie or almost anything else, I think I would love this.
Yeah,
you know?
No, that's fair. And
Like,
why do you think at the time you never really got into it? Like, given all the other stuff you were listening to and that your friends liked it, like what about it? Like, obviously we're going to talk about, you know, our recent listens to it, but like back then, what kind of held you back from liking it?
Well, there was like a certain amount of like, you have to earn my trust that happened with this kind of music after a while, where it was kind of like I wasn't just going to listen to anything. I guess like here was it. This came out near the end of me like really actively being involved in this sort of community. Like it came out in 99. I knew it was coming out. I wasn't like in a super rush, and at the time you couldn't just listen to something. You know?
Yeah, you had to buy the album. You had to, or, you know, someone had to have it, that you sat and listened to it with them in their car or something like that.
Yeah. So like, that's one of the reasons is that I just never got around to getting it. And then like, it just felt like not my part of the scene kind of thing at the time, where it was like, maybe this is for like the different people that like different music than me. Like I like other stuff, you know, like I was just a bigger Korn, Limp Bizkit. I was a Fear Factory guy too.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
You know,
like, do you like, you feel like, do you not feel like Fear Factory and this band are quite similar?
No, they're not. Fear Factory like uses real drums a lot of time. And also just, it's a different kind of it's a different kind of metal. Like this is dancier than Fear Factory. I will say that.
Right.
But Fear Factory is more like prog rock.
Yeah, it's got more 9 Inch Nails kind of to it, I think, Fear Factory, than this does.
This is new metal Rob Zombie is what this is. And I'm fairly certain that's what he was shooting for.
Right.
Too.
Yeah.
Was new metal Rob Zombie. Like sort of a cocaine amphetamine Rob Zombie, I think is what this was supposed to be. You know?
Definitely the way the lyrics are done and the way that the way of the vocal styles definitely feels like tweak out music. And I'm saying that as someone who's never done any drugs aside from smoking weed very occasionally. And I only smoked weed for the first time 8 months ago.
Right. So, I'm not a speedhead either. I don't believe it or not. I'm bad when I take speed because I'm a high anxious guy, you know?
Right.
So I don't take a lot of speed anyway. And I was never kind of into the kind of speed world, but I do think it's cool, you know, like from the outside.
Right.
Like I think cocaine and amphetamines and stuff and like guys just fucking going crazy. Like I think it's very cool. And I also, you know, I have that thing about like redneck type, like dudes, which that's who likes this. That's who likes Static X. This is like redneck music, which is cool because fucking redneck. I like redneck music too, just different kinds.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And I think
they were definitely shooting for that working class kind of guy that gets off work at the construction site and wants to fucking let some steam off at the end of the night.
Yeah, totally. I think that's where you get like calling the record Wisconsin Death Trip. You know, I think you get the sense of like what they were targeting. And the two founding members are from Illinois. And so it's got that kind of Midwestern, they've got that Midwestern sensibility. And this scene, there's like, I think a lot of new metal bands were like weed bands, like you see Deftones, even Korn, Limp Bizkit. Like, to me, those feel more like weed bands where you smoke weed, you get in the pit, you have a good time. Whereas like, this band feels like you do 3 rails and then you get in the pit and you like try to hurt somebody.
Yeah, you're just out there trying to fucking, dance off those fucking natty ices out there. And yeah, Korn is drinking music. I think, Korn is more of a drinking thing. I think Limp Bizkit is drinking music, but I do think Deftones is pure weed music.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, they're obviously big time weed guys, so it makes sense. But yeah, it was interesting to me too. Like, so Wayne Static is from Illinois, and he was actually in a band with Billy Corgan. And then then Billy Corgan wanted to do the Smashing Pumpkins full time, so he left the band he was in with Wayne Static. And I think they were called like Electric Blue Dream or something like that. And so it's kind of interesting, like Deep Blue Dream. Once the Smashing Pumpkins began to gain popularity, Corgan made the choice to commit all of his attention to the Smashing Pumpkins, and the band eventually disbanded. And then Billy Corgan actually helped Wayne Static. Static moved to LA, and he like helped set him up with the other guys in Static X. But yeah, it was just like, it was so interesting that like, that they were kind of in a band together that sounds like it was a little bit more sort of like proggy or whatever. And then Billy Corgan went one way and seemed like Wayne Static kind of went a different way.
I mean, Wayne Static seems like a good businessman. Very smart businessman to me when I read about him and look at him and just like do all the addition, he knew what he was doing for sure. Yeah. He seems like a fucking, he's a business guy. He knows what he's doing. He was building a brand. I think that like he came super close. I don't know like what ended up happening to him in the years after this came out, but it seemed like this thing could have lasted. I mean, I guess he had drug issues, right?
Big time. Yeah.
That's how he died. Yeah. But like, this is something that could have gone on forever. He could still be out doing this.
Well, I mean, Static X is still out there doing this, but we'll get to that a little bit later, because that's a pretty weird situation. But it's for sure. I agree with what you're saying. It does have that kind of uniqueness to it, and again, that kind of gimmick to it, where it does feel like people who like this band are very passionate fans of this band. I feel like there are new metal bands that were pretty easy to be passengers of, like I feel like there were lots of people that were like, I don't love Korn, but like Freak on a Leash is a good song, or like I don't love Limp Bizkit, but like Break Stuff is pretty cool, or Nookie's pretty cool, or whatever, like I think those bands had a lot of like passenger fans that just kind of liked the singles, but wouldn't really call themselves a fan. Whereas like, I think Static X is a band that you're kind of like, you're in. Like, if you're in, you're in. I don't think there's like people who are just like, like Push It's a cool song, but like, I don't really listen to the rest of it. I feel
that's who I was.
Yeah, though. That's interesting to me, because this doesn't like, it doesn't feel like that to me. Like this feels like a band that you'd get all into, I think. Only because I feel like there's no differentiation. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you could listen to Freak on a Leash and then listen to the rest of Follow the Leader, and you could see how someone would only like Freak on a Leash. Whereas like, I feel like if you like Push It, then you would probably like the rest of this album, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, like logically, but I don't think that works in like the human brain, because like, there is something I like. Push It, and I like Wisconsin Death Trip. I like both of those songs. I think there's a Bled for Days. I like that one too. A Bled for Days. That jam. I like those 3 songs, but like, I don't think I like anything else.
Okay.
Like, because I feel like I got it.
Yes.
From those 3 songs. I got the whole package here.
Yeah.
From those 3 songs.
Yeah. I think for sure. I think that's my like, it's funny when you go back to, when we're reviewing albums for this podcast, it's like you put it on. For me, I often am playing Stardew Valley. That's my game I play when I'm listening to music, because it's just very easy to like do mindlessly and then listen to like a podcast or music while you're playing it. And so I was like listening to this, and it was just like, it was almost hard to tell what song I was on sometimes, you know, like I agree with you that you can kind of listen to a few songs and just be like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like, I don't know. Like, to me, I do think in the second half of the album, there's a couple songs that get a little bit better. Like for me, I thought Stem was a pretty good song. To me, it was like the first 6 songs all sound the same. It's all just like, da 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 da, like that. Just, it's just like 4 on the floor, hits you hard. It just sounds very simple to me, and the same. And Wayne Static's vocal delivery is so iconic is the wrong word, because I don't think he's an icon, but you know what I mean. It's so stylistic. Like there's, you know, like you could hear it and you know immediately like kind of who you're listening to. So I think with his vocal delivery and the way that the songs are constructed, it sounds very similar for the first 6 songs. And then Stem is the first song where you're like, okay, to me, they're doing something cool dynamically here. I don't know if I still love it necessarily, but I get it. I like the dynamics here. And then same thing with the Trance is the Motion, I thought was a good song. And
oh, that's a good one too. Yeah.
And and again, that's to me is like a similar kind of thing where it's like, okay, when they play around dynamically and they try and break out of just the kind of industrial, heavy, repetitive riff, that there is something here. There is something in this band. But the first 6 songs to me were so similar, and Push It is the best version of those songs, and it's first. So it's like you hear the best version of that song, and then you hear 5 versions of it in a row that are worse than that version. And you're like, fuck, like it's exhausting. Like I had to listen to this album in shifts at first, because at my first listen, I made it to Otsagolation, or I don't know how to, if I'm saying that wrong and you're a big Static X fan, I'm sorry. But I made it to that song and I literally stopped. I was like, I need a break. And then I came back and I listened to Stem and I was like, oh, that's so ironic that I took a break right here, because it does seem to me like the second half of the album is a little bit more interesting. I think they're trying more things. I don't know that it makes me want to listen to other Static X albums, or I'm like, oh, there's enough interesting things here where I want to be like, okay, let's get to their next album. I think it's called Machine. It doesn't make me want to be like, hey, I got to check out Machine, but like there's enough good ideas where I'm like, okay, I can see the appeal here.
I would check out the next album. I should have checked out their next album today, because I am kind of curious to see if they moved in any way, because like I think I'm like I think I was also let down by them at the time because of the promise of like Staying Alive mixed with fucking heavy metal riffs. Sounds so cool, you know, like that. I think that's what I thought I was getting, and then ending up getting the same drum. I mean, like industrial to me, if it's not like, it's hard for me to listen to that stuff if it's not 9 Inch Nails, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the shit changes a lot in 9 Inch Nails. Like the repetitiveness of it is the same reason I don't like listen to techno, you know?
Yeah.
I just
totally
can't get into it. Like I see dudes in Columbus driving around with their windows all the way down, listening to techno in their car while they drive around. And I'm like, how is this fucking guy doing this? Like, what is going on like in his brain right now? You know?
Oh yeah, I agree completely. Totally. Like at least with EDM there was like the drop, you know, there's like something in the song where it like changes and you're like, okay, cool, we got sirens going off and wah 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 wah, like you're like, oh, this is neat, like whatever. Yeah. I totally agree. Like to me this is the same kind of, and I think that's kind of almost why, like I get this sort of the same feeling almost like, you know, we were talking about Corey Taylor's solo stuff. It's like I get almost the same feel from this. It's completely different and it's not cynical. Like I know what Static X is trying to do, but it's just, yeah, there were a lot of bands in this like nu metal genre that were trying to play with the conventions of nu metal, but the way that Static X is doing it, is just not interesting to me. Like it is very samey. It's very, yeah. I just think the way that they like the idea that we built the songs from the drums up, but then the drums aren't interested. Like that's why bands don't build songs from the drums up, because if you're building songs from the drums up, the drums can't be interesting, because then you would be like, well, how do I build a song around this drum fill? Like that's impossible. Like, it would be very difficult to build songs around drums unless the drums are just like, if the drums are just doing that, then guess what? It's fucking easy to build a song around it. Like, so yeah, I don't know. It was a weird one to me, because I think some new metal bands we listen to, I'm like, how did anyone like this? And I feel like with Static X, I can totally understand why people liked it, but it just missed me. And I think what this really fucking reminded me of, Bryan, honestly, is like a lot of these songs just sounded like, did I hear this on NHL 2004?
Yes, these are very video game. I mean,
it's very video game menu music, you know?
I think Static X got used a lot in movies and shit too, though. Like, I don't think Static. I think like Push It is an action movie song, you know? Yeah. I'm actually looking up Push It, because I'll bet you it's been in like everything.
It was in the film Torque, which I think was that Jason Statham. Sorry?
No, Torque is not Jason Statham. I don't think.
Oh, yeah. It stars Adam Scott. Oh, yeah, that's the one where there's that very funny driving scene where like Adam Scott's trying to start the car and it like makes no sense. Ice Cube's in it, Jamie Presley. Yeah, Torque. This Static X, Bryan, is responsible for one of the funniest sentences in Wikipedia history. Are you ready for this? This is, it says, Push It was used in the intro for the 2000 video game Duke Nukem Land of the Babes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's the kind of thing you would think it would be used in, John. Like, yes. That's what I'm saying.
Land of the Babes.
I'm not a Land of the Babes type of guy. So,
you're not.
Well, I mean, you know, I like babes. You know, I'm a big guy. I'm a guy that's into babes quite a bit.
Yeah,
but no,
who doesn't like the tagline for Duke Nukem Land of the Babes, which is a PlayStation game, is one man, one mission, 1 million babes.
That's all the babes you need, really. I mean, I only need one babe. I'm a one babe guy.
Wow,
you know?
And there it is right there. She's not going to listen, but that is nice that you said that.
What if she does listen, though?
Does she listen? Do you think she listens? No way, right?
No, I just can't imagine her being less interested in something in the whole world. I think it makes her nuts that I listen to this music still. Like, I know that she gets mad when I sing while she's working in the living room now, because she's back working from home.
Right.
But I'm like usually singing Typo Negative, but I think she thinks Typo Negative is basically also Static X, you know? Like, I think she just thinks all these things run together to her. But yeah, I don't know if there was ever a time in my life where I would have been super open to this, you know? And also, people got to remember that, like, I didn't like love Slipknot back then either. There was like, I did have a weird kind of like aversion to gimmicks, you know? I know I was an ICP fan, but like, other than that, like when it came to metal, like I didn't see Korn as a gimmicky band. I didn't see Deftones, and Deftones was my favorite band. Like, I would tell anybody who would listen that Deftones were my favorite band. I don't think Deftones are a gimmicky band. I don't even think Limp Bizkit really was. I mean, the people went to see Limp Bizkit concerts for the music, not for, like, the Toilet, you know? The Toilet was a big bonus to the Limp Bizkit experience. But I think
feel like Limp Bizkit was, like, they were, like shysters. I don't think they were like, you know what I mean? Like, they weren't gimmicky, but they were also like, with Limp Bizkit, you always got a sense of like, Fred Durst is just a better salesman than he is a musician.
Right. He knows how to make a brand. But I admire.
But it wasn't gimmicky,
now.
Though. It wasn't gimmicky. Yeah.
Right. And if you were like, just like, even with me, like just a dude that never did anything, with show business or comedy or something like that. I think Fred Durst comes off like really genuine too. I think his brand is that he was kind of a genuine guy to me, at least from the time.
Yeah. I don't get the sense that it was cynical. Like, I think he fully believed in what he was doing. No question about it.
But when I saw a guy like Wayne Static or Slipknot or any of those, like I don't know what it was, man. There's a humbleness to ICP that I think ended up winning me over, and that's maybe why I liked them. But
I feel like with ICP, even though ICP is definitely very gimmicky, obviously, there was something about them though that felt like they lived the gimmick in a weird way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, yes, it was like a gimmick to put the clown paint on and whatever, but there was like an element to like, I think I don't mind a gimmick if I feel like it's genuine. Like, to me with ICP, it felt genuine. Like, it felt like they were like, that they believed it. Like, they believed the gimmick. They weren't like, oh, well, if we throw clown paint on and we spray Fago at people, they're gonna love us more, so we have to do it. To me, it just felt like they were like, this would be really fun if we did this, so we should do it. And that's like, and it was a genuine thing. Whereas like, it feels like Static X, you see like early pictures of Wayne Static and stuff, and it's clear that he probably sat down and was like, how do I want to look as the front man of a metal band?
Right.
I know I'll spend 40 minutes before every show spiking my hair, and I'll grow out a super long goatee that matches the spiky hair, and I'll wear super baggy pants, and that will create a look, and that's the part I think that bothers me. It's like, if it felt like the look came first, or if the look is genuine, then you could get behind it. Whereas like, yeah, I think something like this, or even Slipknot, where they're like, there's 9 of us. Like, what should we do? Should we put on masks? Yeah, let's put on masks. Like, that'll be cool,
Yeah, there's already fucking 9 of you, dude. Why don't you just do the 9 guys gimmick?
Yeah. Yeah, we got a jillion guys over here. Come check out what this guy does.
Right, and I don't even want to say I don't want people to think that I don't think, Fred Durst put a lot of thought into what he looked like. I just didn't know that at the time,
Right.
Like I thought, Fred Durst, he just grabs whatever is sitting next to his bed, and he gets out of bed just like I do, and puts his clothes on, and then goes out and sings for all those people, for 20,000 people. And but this guy was wearing a costume, and like, I think maybe, I think that's a lot cooler now. I think like I'm way more open to something like that now than I would have been back then. And that may be why these guys just didn't really grab me back then. And, again, I appreciate the vibe here a lot. I think they're vibing, dude. If I had to choose one word to describe these guys, I'd be like, hey, these guys are fucking vibing.
Yeah, I think, I definitely don't hate the ethos, and like reading their interviews and stuff. Like, I don't hate what they're about. I mean, I kind of hate what they're about right now, but back then I don't think I hated what they were about. I think too, though, the other thing that gets lost maybe in this discussion a bit is like, I mean, you were a little older, but like, I was 13, 14, 15 when I was listening to this music. You wanted it to be cool, so you didn't want to like, so Static X would have been a hard band to like show people, because you if you were trying to get people into the music you liked, or you were trying to get them to understand it, it almost feels like Wayne Static was a guy that people would have been like, oh, I'm not going to listen to a band of a guy that looks like that, like, and maybe that would have been cool to some people. I'm sure there are some people who would have seen it and been like, well, that guy looks fucking cool. But I think for me, I feel like I felt that there was like a cheesiness to some of this that I just was like, I can't get into it because I don't want to be seen as a guy who's listening to like uncool or like cheesy shit.
Yeah. It's so fucking, that's probably it too, man. It was just like, I didn't want to be caught like listening to something that maybe in the future people would think wasn't cool. And I was pretty sure that people were going to always think that we're always going to think these bands were cool. Like, I thought I was listening to like Led Zeppelin, you know?
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's how big they were at the time.
Well, I was listening to Led Zeppelin. I wasn't listening to like the Velvet Underground or something that like now we are still this far away from, and you listen to like the Velvet Underground and Nico and you're like, this is the fucking coolest thing that anybody's ever made. You know?
Totally.
It's old, but it's the coolest. Like, you don't feel that way about like Korn and stuff like that. It's a different kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I looked up a review of Duke Nukem Land of the Babes that mentioned Static X by name, and I feel like it kind of fits in with what we're talking about. So this is from the IGN review of Duke Nukem Land of the Babes from December 21st, 2000. And they're reviewing the sound of Duke Nukem, okay? And it says, "Be quiet, Duke. Your shtick is played. If I want to hear somebody say, 'Come get some' repeatedly, I'll ask Dave Z to pop his Army of Darkness DVD into the PS2. I'm guessing that's like an IGN writer. I don't know. But I'm not even liable to get that far because I don't want to hear somebody say, 'Come get some' repeatedly. I also don't want to hear any of the rest of Duke's massive library of posturings or the silly dialogue in the occasional cutscenes. The musical accompaniment delivers the second shot of the audio 1-2 punch. Boring rock and roll with accents by Static X, whose uniquely rotten sounds actually rather suit the game's grimly macho character. So a few points for an appropriate choice of band, but minus several more for making a game unpleasant enough to suit these tunes."
You know, that just really hit something in me too, because like I had also in, I don't know, 10th grade, right? When I was in 10th grade, I was 16 years old. I can't remember. It must have been 1994, 95. It was 95 because I saw Korn that year. That was the first concert I went to. I remember reading about Nirvana. I did a report on Kurt Cobain, right? Like that was like this. I was so into him. I thought he was like the coolest fucking guy in the world or whatever. I didn't get hip to him until after he was dead. You know what I mean? Like when he was alive, I was like, who the fuck is this guy? You know,
I was 9 when he died. So yeah.
Yeah, I was probably of age to be listening to him, but I thought rock and roll was for nerds, so I didn't listen to anything with guitars.
Hell yeah.
So anyway, I knew that he had always had problems with this like macho bullshit thing. And maybe I saw a lot of that too. Like, not that Limp Bizkit or Korn are like not macho bullshit, but they don't feel like it, you know? Like,
well,
it doesn't, like Limp Bizkit and Korn, they feel like almost like they don't feel macho. I guess they give me more of a vibe that like a grunge bands type of feelings at the time. Now I can see why people thought it was macho bullshit. Like I can see that now, but at the time it felt like a new thing that wasn't macho. But there were bands like Slipknot and Static X and Dope that just felt like just dude bands. You know what I mean? Bands for like football players, which all these bands were, but for some reason in my mind I had decided that they weren't, you know?
I think for me, the Korn and Limp Bizkit don't feel like that for different reasons. I think with Korn, they didn't feel like that because Jonathan Davis like spent a lot of time trying to help you understand that like he was not popular, was bullied like hell, had a shitty upbringing. Like, you know, any interviews from those times, like he's trying to paint himself as this like, and not even paint himself. I think he was dealing with a lot of shit, but like he was trying really hard to come across as this like mysterious, pained guy. And he was like skinny and he had a shitty mustache and he had shitty hair. And like, he just didn't come across as like a guy that was, and I agree with you. Like I could totally see people dismissing the music as macho, or I could even buy like misogynistic or, you know, any number of those kind of like adjectives you want to throw on it. I can totally get it and understand it. But I think at the time, Korn didn't feel that way because of Jonathan Davis specifically. And then I think Limp Bizkit didn't because Fred Durst just seemed like a geek to me. Like even back then, like cool though, like I thought he was cool, but there was also this kind of like eminent, like he was really trying hard to be cool. And he was he was mostly succeeding. Like Fred Durst had this weird thing where it's like everyone on Earth knew that he was trying really, really hard to be cool, but like his music was good enough and he was pulling it off enough that you just kind of went with it. And that's very hard to do. It's very hard to transcend like trying to look cool. But I feel like Fred, in some ways, at least for a couple of years, and I think that might also be why Limp Bizkit aged so much more poorly than a lot of these bands, is that like once the jig was up, it was like you couldn't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like once Fred became uncool, it was over. There was nothing he could do to save himself. It was done. He had a moment. They were like one of the biggest bands on earth, which made him cool, even though he was trying so hard to be cool. But then the second people started to be like, man, this guy might actually be kind of a nerd, it was over. There was nothing he could do to save himself. There was no pivot for Fred.
Yeah, it really was like fucking somebody went on TV and said he peed his pants on stage, and the next day everybody was just like, I just don't like this guy anymore at all.
Yeah, like it's crazy to imagine that they went from Chocolate Starfish, which I don't know, must have gone multiple times platinum, was a massive album. They did the fucking theme song for one of the biggest movies on earth, Mission Impossible 2, like all that shit. And then the next record is Gold Cobra and everybody hated it. And it was like, they might as well have just disappeared off the face of the earth. Like, and no other new metal band went through that really. Like, obviously some of them just kind of aged out of oblivion, but like Slipknot's still around. System of a Down is still kind of around. Disturbed is still around. Like Deftones are still around. Like Limp Bizkit is really the only band that the bubble burst on in such a like dramatic way.
I just feel like they could hit the road now, though.
Oh, of course they could. They could.
Limp Bizkit is a nostalgia act now. When they decide to like cash that chip in,
yes,
it's going to be a huge fucking tour
for sure. Know? But they had a 10-year down period. Like from 2005 to 2015, a Limp Bizkit tour would have been a losing proposition.
Korn,
I think it's only in the last
thing.
I think it's only in the last like 5 years it's come around. Korn obviously had some really, really shitty albums, but I think Korn, I don't know, there's something about Korn that's just aged better, I think.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I can't really I think Korn had some lean years when they were doing the Skrillex stuff.
Yes.
And like that whole thing was like, oh, holy shit, guys. Like, what are you fucking doing? I know me and Brett went and saw him a couple years ago before this last tour we went to, and they fucking didn't hardly play anything I knew.
Yeah, which is so stupid.
Yeah.
Like at some point, like, you got to recognize you're a legacy act.
Yeah, I guess you do have to kind of recognize that at some point, and maybe it is a hard thing to come to do, you know? Where you're like, oh, yeah, they just want to hear they just want to hear Blind, man.
Yeah, they just want to hear, there's 10 songs we've released like 200 songs, and people want to hear about 10 to 15 of them, and we're just going to have to play those every night until the end of Oblivion. Yeah.
But these guys, I think for me, are like they maybe age worse than a lot of them. You know what I always talk like, so I'm a big wrestling fan, and I really liked WCW wrestling growing up.
Yeah.
It was kind of like, that was my company. That was the thing I watched. And no wrestling ages well, right?
No, yeah.
But when you watch old WCW shows, and you see the sponsors, and you just see the general fucking aesthetic, it looks so old. You know, it really does looked like when I would like turn on fucking Happy Days or something like that. Like,
right.
Jesus Christ, this is some old looking shit.
Yeah. The sets were always very tacky, and yeah, I hear you on that for sure.
Static X feels like that's how Static X feels now, which again, like if you liked it, then there's so much. Happy Days was itself nostalgia. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure. It was a show about the 50s done in the 70s. Like,
yeah. And that's just, I think like that's the thing I would say in this review is just like, I don't find this to be like a bad album. I don't think it's bad, but I think that like this is in that same pantheon of like this may be, of all the albums we've done, the one that maybe ages the worst out of all of them.
Yeah.
It's really
it's in the convo for sure.
I mean, because Puddle of Mud sucked then, you know?
Right.
But like, we didn't like Puddle of Mud when Puddle of Mud was like big. So like this one to me, I don't think Puddle of Mud was ever good. I do see where this was a good album.
Right.
Back then.
I also think too, it's the cool factor. Like, I think that because of the way that they dressed and their aesthetic and everything, like, I think Puddle of Mud wasn't cool either. Like, when they first came out, like, Wes Scantlin just looked like a low rent Kurt Cobain and sounded like one too. Like, no one was ever like, Puddle of Mud, what a fucking cool band. What a cool guy. I wish I was him. And I feel like Static X at the time, people would have been like, holy shit, Wayne Static is cool as shit. He looks cool.
I know I did.
This is a cool look. And whereas now I think your WCW metaphor is pretty apt. In 2020, you look at him and you go, holy shit, look at this fucking relic from the year 2000. How was this ever cool? Like, it's aged in that kind of weird, it's aged in a way that's not coming back, you know, like that style. Like, people aren't going to look at this album in 2035 and be like, whoa, holy shit, Wayne Static was really on to something back then. Like, no one's dressing like that again. You know what I mean?
I mean, nobody's putting that mix of clothes on.
That's
what
obviously
I mean. Big pants are gonna, come back.
Yes, exactly. But I'm talking about
like,
the whole
we know
combo.
a lot of this stuff, but the whole combo is very much of a time. Like, it's like a lot of stuff that, like, when we do like repurpose and go back to like old styles, we only keep the best top level shit of that time. And some of that stuff, like the shirts, are probably gonna go.
This
the
isn't
Western
coming back.
shirts and Jinkos is not gonna be a look. I don't know. Yeah. And that might be another thing that also, like, we're listening to these albums in 2020. I'm 41 years old, and like listening to some, like, this whole package, looking at it, like, I am definitely looking at it through the eyes of, number one, somebody who's a little bit older. Number two, somebody who does some version of show business. You know what I mean? That has to like maintain some sort of a brand. And like, looking at it, it's very hard for me to go back to like when I was that age, when, again, I didn't know Fred Durst was a brand, when I didn't know Jonathan Davis was a brand, and see how I would really think of this or how I really felt about it. Because like now when I look at it, all I really see is a brand. And that might also be the fault of the band that continued on too,
Yeah, well, and exactly. So we can get into that. So obviously we review articles about the band every time we're reviewing an album, and the Static X history is very strange. So Wayne Static died in 2014. He died at the age of 48. It was a combination of his prior drug use. He died of a prescription drug overdose. It was believed that he was sober from illicit drugs for quite a while, but that his past drug use had been a factor in his death. And then after his death, Static X has continued on with a masked version of Wayne Static called Zero, spelled with an X and a number 0. So like XER number 0. And it is widely believed that it's Edsel Dope from the band Dope, but that hasn't been 100% confirmed. And it's very weird. He performs in a mask that kind of resembles Wayne Static's face with like some scars on it. And then he spikes up his hair like Wayne Static and has a beard like Wayne Static as well. It's pretty fucking weird to me. I didn't know that this was a real thing. Wayne Static and Tony Campos, the two kind of founding members of Static X, actually had a big fight before Wayne Static's death over the name Static X. So it's weird. Tony wasn't actually a founding member. The band was founded by Wayne Static and Ken Jay, the drummer. But then Tony came to be, I guess, one of the chief songwriters. So they had split the Static X name, and Wayne Static wanted to tour using the name before he died. Tony wouldn't let him. They got in a big fight over it. And then once Wayne died, now they're touring as Static X with a guy dressed like Wayne. Very weird to me, Brian.
I mean, Tony seems like, probably an asshole. I would guess that he's not the type of guy you'd want to meet, right?
Doesn't seem like it. I mean, this is Wayne talking about Tony before so he wanted to do a 15-year anniversary tour of Wisconsin Death Trip in 2014. And so he wanted to play it front to back. And then he had a whole new band. And then he said, yeah, we're starting slow. So they're playing smaller clubs because Wayne Static believes that without having the Static X name, he wouldn't be able to sell more tickets. And this is what he said about it. He said, we're starting slow and I don't have the Static X name anymore. I made a deal with Tony Campos, my old bass player, last year. He's the only legal Static X member besides me. I paid him a bunch of money in 2012 to use the name, and he's just a greedy motherfucker, man. He just hates me to death. He's trying to gouge the shit out of me. I made him an offer to give him 25% of my net profits on the tour, and he refused it. He wants this outrageous number. He wants more money than I make in a year, and he's just doing it on purpose because he hates me for whatever reason. But he also doesn't want to play in Static X. I gave him the opportunity, like, do you want to tour with us? He's like, no. Okay, well, will you let me use the name? No. He's basically just telling me, like, fuck you, I'm like, well, at least my name is Wayne Static and people know who I am. I'm not just some jack-off bass player that used to play in a band called Static X. I'm like, fuck you, I'm still playing in a band called Wayne Static. It's a little bit smaller because not everyone knows the name Wayne Static and everyone knows the name Static X, but we're going to build it up. I basically made the choice that Static X is done unless Tony changes his mind at some point, which I doubt he will. We're just going to build on Static X. The funny thing is that it's still the same guys that played with Static X last year, the same songs basically. We just can't call it Static X.
I don't see how he couldn't draw as Wayne Static.
Me neither. I mean, it seems pretty... it's basically the same name.
I mean, I get what he's saying, though. It is like, fuck you. I took the name Wayne Static. But I guess, we don't know. God, this kind of stuff always fucking gives me the nerves, when you do work with people. And you're like, I'm not like a litigious businessy kind of guy, but also probably nobody else in Static X saw themselves that way. There's this weird thing that happens, man, when you get famous. I think that is so freaky to me. And I think I don't think about it very much because I don't feel like I'm ever in danger of getting into that space where I'm fighting over the name of a thing.
Right. Yeah.
Especially
it's weird,
because I would give it up. I would just give the fucking name up.
Well, it's also crazy that Wayne was offering him a quarter of the tour profits basically for nothing. I mean, all he had to do was say, yeah, you can use the name. And Wayne was going to give him 25%. And he said no. So Tony gave his side of the story.
I would love to hear it.
So he said, several people came and went. This is, I believe, after Wayne died. Yes. So this is after Wayne has died. This is on Tony's, on the Static X Facebook page from Tony.
No. I feel I'm bracing myself right now.
Yeah, get braced.
I'm putting my seatbelt on.
He says several people came and went through the ranks of Static X throughout the years, managers, agents, band members, etc. Through everything, I remained a steady partner to Wayne and Static X. I love the band and I love the music that we all made together. Being in a band comes along with many challenges. Success, pressure, expectations, fame, money, personal influences, and egos can all be very divisive factors for people that are working and living in such close quarters for extended periods of time. When you add drugs and alcohol into the mix, it can be very easy to lose yourself and lose sight of what's really important. As time went on, Wayne began to isolate himself from the band. Drugs and alcohol truly began to take over. His personal life became more of the focal point of Static X and was on display during band interviews as well as on stage. I found myself in many uncomfortable positions and began to feel the need to stand up for myself and protect the integrity of the band that we worked so hard to build. Unfortunately, Wayne and I eventually reached a point where it seemed impossible to overcome our differences. Wayne expressed his intent to go solo, so we agreed to take some time away from one another and to give Static X a break. Neither Wayne or I quit the band. Our partnership remained intact while our personal differences kept us from working together. After some time, Wayne expressed the desire to tour his solo band under the name of Static X. I knew that it remained impossible for me to insert myself back into that toxic environment, so I reluctantly agreed to give Wayne my blessing to tour Static X without my involvement for a limited time. We both came to a business agreement and we went about our separate lives. During that tour, some legal troubles involving drugs took place and ultimately led to cutting the tour short. While Wayne did also have a lingering health issue, it was this incident that ultimately ended the Wayne solo band touring as Static X experiment. Wayne returned to his solo project. I continued touring with other projects. We both had hurt feelings, blah, 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 blah. And then he says, the bottom line is I miss Wayne. Despite our differences and disagreements, he was my friend for over a decade. He was my brother and my partner. Many of the people that were closest to Wayne in the early years were driven out of his life towards the end. In our own ways, we all did our best to reach him, but we were all powerless to save him. I wish that Wayne was here celebrating 20 years of Wisconsin Death Trip with us. I truly believe in my heart that if Wayne were sober and healthy and had distanced himself from the many negative influences in his life, he'd be doing this with us. I know that Kenny and Koichi feel the same way that I do. In closing, I just want to say I'm not interested in rehashing the things that divided us. That's in closing, after 7 paragraphs where he rehashes all of it.
Not only did he rehash it, but he like squarely blamed Wayne Static for everything.
And a deceased Wayne Static who can't defend himself. Yeah.
Right.
Who obviously had like some demons that he was dealing with.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a tough one.
There's a little piece in there that really did make me kind of fucking mad, was that like where he said, fuck, what did he, there's a line in this thing that he said he went off the road for medical issues.
Yeah. But he had other medical issues.
But it was drugs. And it's like, well, fucking dude, that's just saying you don't believe that he had medical issues. It's all that sounds like to me. It's like, I don't know.
Or that the drugs caused the medical issues. So it's like, oh, you left the tour for medical issues, but like it's your own stupid fault because you're addicted to drugs.
Yes. Yeah. Like this guy seems like a real sleazy dude. And like, I mean, Wayne Static was probably a fucking prick. You know, like, I'm not saying the guy was like, seemed like the nicest dude in the world, but like he did. I guess like if anybody deserved a tour with that name, it would be him. I feel like Wayne Static gave his life to Static X.
And maybe changed his name to Wayne Static.
Yeah. Maybe Tony Campos gave a lot of his life, but he didn't change his name to Wayne Static. And he wasn't the guy that walked around with the big tall hair and all that.
Yeah, know Wayne Static had to do that every day. He didn't want, if someone ran into him at the mall, he wanted people to know that like, oh, it was him, and he cared.
Yeah. It feels like Wayne Static was the guy that Static X was. And like there needs to be a new sort of law, I think, about intellectual property like this, where it's like, look, we all know that Wayne Static is Static X, you know, Tony Campos. Like he could get anybody else to play bass.
Well, it's funny because he said like, so there, I read an interview with Zero, the new lead singer of Static X, and he actually talks about how difficult doing Wayne's vocals is, and that it like took a lot for him to learn how to do the vocals, because the vocal patterns are like really difficult and interesting and stuff. So yeah, let me see. So yeah,
what do we think of Edsel Dope though? What do we think about the Dope guy? You know, I don't really know.
I don't know. I mean, I don't really know anything about Dope. I mean, so in this interview with Zero, or Edsel Dope, if that's who's playing Zero, which like most everybody seems pretty much agreed that it is him. It seems a little bit weird that he's really trying hard to paint it like everyone's cool with it. Like this whole interview is about how like Wayne's family like comes to the shows and they think it's like amazing that he's like in a Wayne mask with his Wayne hair and shit. And it's like, is that really? Because it seems like, because you read that interview with Wayne where he basically says like, you know, Tony Campos is trying to steal money from me and he's like a motherfucker and whatever. And then you read that like they dressed some guy up as Wayne Static and toured the 20th anniversary of Wisconsin Death Trip. They released a 2-volume album called Project Regeneration that contained the final vocal performances and musical compositions of Wayne Static. And you would assume that like Static X is making the money off of that. Like seems a little bit fucked up that Tony's like, you can't tour as Static X, but when you die, I'm going to dress another guy up as you and take all of that money. Like, it's very fucking weird to me. And then, yeah, this whole interview is just about how, like, oh, like Wayne's family came out to the shows. They loved me. Like, so he says, it was very emotional seeing Wayne's family on tour. I really didn't know what to expect at first because this is such a unique situation. Wayne's sister Amy came to meet me on the tour bus immediately after our show in Atlanta. She just wrapped her arms around me and we both just started to cry. I totally lost my shit and I couldn't get it together. I was just sobbing and I felt such a connection to her and I could feel the love that she had for her brother being projected onto me. It was so emotional and I felt like I had just received the ultimate form of approval for what I was doing. And it's like, is that like, I don't know. I just feel like that's very fucking weird. And like, you're talking about a law, like there should almost be a law where it's like, yeah, if I die, you can't dress another guy up in a mask and say it's me and fucking go on tour and make money. Like, it's very weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It is so, I mean, what a weird story. And also, like, it does feel, I hate that law. I mean, I just want to come back to that. I hate the law of like intellectual property sorts of things because this Campos dude should have never like owned the name. And I guess like if he wants to tour now with it, it's like whatever. It's like it's water under the bridge at this point. He's dead. Like there's nothing you can really do, you know? So like, I guess that's fine. I do think it's weird unless they're cutting in Wayne Static's family, maybe. That is the only thing I can think.
They must be, right? Like,
yeah, they got to be cutting them in.
Yeah, it's so there's a couple other like very funny lines in this interview with Zero. He talks about, he says, he says, what can I say about Tony? He's just the man. He's a monster bass player. And because he's so humble, it's easy to forget how much Tony's voice helped to define the Static X sound. As a bandmate, he sort of keeps everything in check. There's no ego with Tony. If he likes what you're doing, you'll get a nod of approval. And if he's not feeling it, he'll definitely let you know. It's great because it all comes from the right place. Even when he and Wayne had differences, those differences were rooted in Tony's love for Static X and in his willingness to fight for what was best for the integrity of Static X. That's truly his role. So it seems like, again, that like they're kind of skirting around this idea that like Wayne wasn't well enough to be touring. And like Tony was like, listen, man, you're on drugs. You can't tour as Static X because it will make Static X as a group look bad.
Yeah.
And it seems like they've like coached Zero on this too. And yeah, and then they also like ask, like, as someone who has to perform with the Zero mask nightly, did you have any suggestions on what you wanted it to be? Who created the mask? Was there anything specific you wanted represented? I honestly had no interest in singing for Static X without a mask. I needed a level of separation from my own identity in order to properly serve Static X and to respect Wayne's legacy. Again, I didn't create this band or the vibe, so why should my face be at the forefront? From the beginning, a mask was just something that felt very necessary to me. Which is just like, if Adam Lambert toured with Queen and they put him in a Freddie Mercury mask, people would lose their motherfucking minds. It's only true. Because this is just like a small nu metal band that no one cares.
Yeah, I think people do when they find out. Also, like, it tends to be a thing because I've known they've been doing it for a while. I told you earlier I was going to go to the show when it came through Ohio because I thought it was just freakish enough for me to like be worth going to, you know?
Yeah.
But they played the same night as No Bunny, and I'm a bigger fan of No Bunny, and so I went to that concert instead. And so it does sort of also like live in the same space as Static X, and that like it is kind of cool that it's a gimmick because it is a gimmicky band, you know? And like I guess like it also, that stuff that Zero was saying really did make that Tony Campos seem like an asshole and not very humble, like almost like a cry for, like he's crying for help, right? Like,
yeah,
you can't like tour with Dope. Dope is probably not hitting the road and like headlining a tour at this point.
No chance.
And in the size venues that Static X is playing now with Edsel Dope in a Wayne Static mask, because they played I think it's 5,000 seat venue here when they came through town.
Really? I wouldn't have expected that. Holy.
Yeah, it was our mid-sized venue, our venue that goes right before the arena. There's
fuck.
Yeah.
That's
Like,
I
so-
mean, I get it. It's the Wisconsin Death Trip anniversary tour, but still, that's crazy.
Yeah, they're big here. They're big in the Midwest. I mean, it's just one of those like that's one of those bands that's always going to be able to come through here. I mean, Dope was never really able to come through here and play like a big thing.
They weren't that. Yeah, they never were that big.
They were like an Alrosa Villa band, which is that was like a 600 to 800, maybe it was maybe 1,000 people venue.
Right.
And that's where Dimebag Darrell got killed. So
oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so this is the part where he talks about Wayne's vocal lines, and it's kind of funny, like he almost like admits that he's like shitty, which is kind of good. The question is, what are your favorite songs to perform on a nightly basis, and what tracks stand out to you in a live setting? And Zero says, I'm With Stupid is awesome to play now, especially because I had a hard time with it early on. Wayne's delivery is very tricky. Lots of weird vocal patterns, weird ass words, and he's singing way higher than your ear will sometimes lead you to think. I really don't think that I have a favorite to perform. I just do my best to give my best each night for the band and the fans.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing Rob Zombie when you're doing Wayne Static.
Yeah.
He has the same voice as Rob Zombie. I think that's part of what like made me not hate this album too. Right. It was just kind of like, I like White Zombie, you know?
Yeah,
I don't think I liked like a ton of Rob Zombie, but I saw White Zombie live before they broke up, and like it was just one of like those cool experiences that's like, you know, they're not going to tour White Zombie again. I don't think.
Totally.
But he doesn't, he's like not a guy that has to do that, you know? These guys have to do this. Because they have to bring in money, you know.
They definitely have to do it. Edsel Dope more than anyone else. Okay, before we get to the challenge, we should give this album a score. For those of you who are new to the P.O.D. cast, how we rate all of these albums is with a tweet defense. So that means if someone were to tweet at you that they did not like the album, how many tweets would you exchange with them in order to either argue with them or convince them otherwise? So Bryan, how many tweets are you going here?
All right, John, this is going to be different. This is a weird one here.
Okay.
And again, every month I feel like I have to say this, that I just treat this like a linear.
Yeah. Like it's like you just have heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And also it's a number. It's like a 1 to whatever.
Oh yeah. It's an infinity. It could be infinity.
It's 1 to 27 now.
Yes. Well, yeah. Now that you've set the standard with your Disturbed score.
So we're looking at a number between 1 and 27. I mean, I will give this album like a 5. You know,
yeah.
I think I gave. No, let me give it a 10. I think here's where let me put this somewhere.
Yeah, put it somewhere, baby.
I just want to put it somewhere.
Put it somewhere.
I want to put it right there above Puddle of Mud and above P.O.D. Like I do, it is above those two albums.
Okay.
And that's where I want it to be remembered in this mishmash that's going to get bigger.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like this album's better than WWE Forcible Entry. By like a lot.
No question about it. That's not even a topic of discussion.
Let me give it an 8. An 8 is a good number. I think 8 is where I would go with this.
All right. I'll go 3, I think.
That's a John's 8. They call that a John's 8.
That is. Yeah, the 3, because here's how I see it going. They say the album is bad. I probably start by saying like, well, Wayne Static is cool though. And then they're like, yeah, is he cool though? And I'm like, yeah, check out the lyrics to Love Dump. We didn't really get to that, but Love Dump, for those of you who never heard this Static. So one thing that Wayne really had going for him was he sings in such a way that it's impossible to tell what he's saying. So he could literally say anything, and he does, because the song Love Dump, the chorus is, I always loved you, love dumpling. Your shit's like chocolate cake, and your ass smells like a rose. I really hate you, love dumpling. Now my bowels ache.
I actually think that not being able to understand what he was saying might have hurt this band for me too.
So you think that if you could have heard those lyrics loud and clear, that was a selling point for you?
No, it just, I didn't. I mean, a little bit. No, I'm saying that like, I didn't know what he was saying, so nothing made a particularly huge impact on me. Like, I thought it was neat the way he said, get up on this Wisconsin death trip. Like, I thought that was like a cool way he said that.
Right.
And no,
you want to be able to sing along. You want to be able to get into it.
Yeah, I want to be able to sing along.
Understand the words, then you could get into it.
And it's important for me to know what these guys are singing about. I didn't know what this guy was singing about at all. I assume Push It was about having sex, actually, too. And then, like, seeing these lyrics, obviously this makes me like them less. But I just assume that there are other lyrics on this album that maybe would have made me like them more, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I could see that for sure. So then I would show them the lyrics to Love Dump. Then maybe we'd have one more tweet, and that would be that. So that's where I'm arriving at 3. Before we get to the challenge and the poll, just want to remind everybody that you can donate to the show by going to patreon.com/thepodcast. Remember, cast is spelled with a K, like corn. We're doing one bonus episode a month every month. That just costs you $4, and it also gets you access to our whole back catalog. This month, we had a really fun bonus episode. We had Jordan Yule on from the Insurgents podcast and Media Matters. He's a super funny guy. He was great to have on the show. We reviewed Straight Up, the tribute album to Lynn Straight from Snot, and had a blast with that one. So you can check that out along with all of our other bonus episodes at patreon.com/thepodcast. And if you want to be like Jack and donate $50 to the show, you can decide what we do for a bonus episode. So that's going to be very fun to do. And you can also follow us on Twitter at the POD_cast. Again, cast is spelled with a K. You can participate in all the polls on our Twitter. That's where we do all the polls. So if you want to have a say in voting for what albums we listen to, that's the place to do it. So make sure you follow us. We just went over 1,000 followers, Brian. So we're moving up in the Twitter world. So give us a follow at the POD_cast. You can donate patreon.com/thepodcast. All right, the challenge, Brian. This one was suggested by you. Before we get to the challenge, last month's challenge was where we had to both answer a question like David Draymond from Disturbed, and the winner of the challenge was the listeners. It was deemed that someone. I wish I could remember who wrote in. If it was you, I apologize for not remembering who you are. But someone had wrote in. Oh, I think it was. I know who it was, actually. It was Justice. Buzz Meg had written in and said that the listeners won last month's challenge, like right after they had listened to the episode. And so as a fun thing in the poll this month, to determine the winner of the challenge, I gave a third option. Usually it's just John or Brian, but I gave the third option, the listeners, and that was the most popular option. So people loved I guess that's considered a tie, Brian. People just loved our David Draymond question answering so much that they were the true winners. This month's challenge, Brian, you were the one who came up with it. Do you want to introduce it, or do you want me to do it?
Trying to figure out which side. Well, we're doing both, right?
Yeah, we're going to do both. Yeah.
All right. You can introduce it, dude.
All right. So the challenge for this month is if we were to pass away, God forbid, and someone needed to take our place in a mask on our regular podcasts, so on Blocked Party and on Street Fight Radio, who would we want to take our place in the mask? And then also the inverse, if we had to play 0 for a podcast, so if, God forbid, one of our, maybe it's not even our friends, but if someone from a podcast passed away and we wanted to, we had to fulfill the 0 role for them, who would we want to play and why, I guess, or whatever. So Brian, you can go first. Give me your answers for both here.
Okay. So who I would want to replace me.
Yes.
It's I'm trying to think of who is like I've been trying to think of who would be a really good Bryan replacement. And I'm going to go with Joe Rogan. I think he could come over here and really make a good run at being me. I think
so. I think talking new metal with Joe Rogan would be fun for me.
Probably, for sure. I don't think he's probably a fan, would be my guess.
I don't know. He's pretty, like, he might just be too old, but like he's pretty fucking jacked, and like I could see him being like into it.
I guess if you go to UFC, you know,
like that's all they play.
the,
like Bodies was the song for the UFC forever.
Yeah, so maybe he does like it. Ooh, let's try and get him on. I know people get mad.